He's got to look up some other stuff on Google, so I'm more than willing to let him go back, and we will spend all as much time as we take.
Okay, so Mr. Jawari, please continue where you left off.
That wasn't a Google lookup. That was a picture I received from my granddaughter, who's 4 months and 27 days today, and she rolled over. So everybody's excited in our household, and her name is Ariana, and I love her very much. And I'll gladly show you her picture. A quick shout out. Okay, so why is there urgency? So let me tell you, we need to move very quickly, and probably with a different approach. No hurdles, no timeouts. That's what Mr. Greenspan said. Now, there are significant unanswered questions about the new power mix and the speed of switching away from fossil fuel power in one of the biggest political battles brewing in our country. I mean, I believe MP Grisham went through a lengthy, commentary on that. But let me give you some stats. 6 provinces, including 3 largest, get more than 90% of their power from clean sources. That includes hydro, nuclear, and wind. 4 provinces, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, still rely heavily on coal or natural gas for their electricity. The premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan have declared the 2035 clean electricity regulation too costly and have said they simply won't meet them. So there are challenges, yet we know we have to go. We have to move in this direction. We have to make an investment. We have a very short runway of 25 years, and here we go. And it took us over a century to get here, and now we have to work faster, and we have to work smarter. And all of those elements that I talked to you about was things that we really need to hear from witnesses. I personally don't think four sessions is enough, but hey, look, if we can get to all those answers in 4 sessions, I'm all for it. So the sooner we start on this thing, the better it is. Okay, and the federal government is quite flexible. We are ready to work with the provinces. We are ready to work with generators. We work with organization entities that they're in charge of transmission, and to come in and work together and create that think tank. That hey, look, how can we move? So we already know the question. Now we have to find the answer. 25 years, $80 billion a year, in my estimate. We know the sources of generation. We need to look at different ways, and we need to be innovative. We need to be agile, and we need to make sure that the end solution means that we have adequate, reliable, affordable, and accessible source of green electricity. So, Mr. Chair, I'll end by saying, once again, I believe the urgency, and I hope I have demonstrated over the last whatever minutes that I talked about, the urgency that's needed for us to deal with all those elements. And the urgency is today. And I don't think that study should supersede the study that we are in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. MP Jawari, for your comments and for joining us on this committee. It's great to have you and look forward to hearing more of you in the days ahead. We'll now proceed to Ms. Lapointe, who's online. Ms. Lapointe, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to start by saying that I am supportive of the study that is being proposed, but I can't support the notion that we would stop the work that we've already started with the electricity study. I think we're at a threshold of a pivotal era in Canada's journey towards a sustainable future, and it's crucial to acknowledge the indispensable role of our electricity grid in realizing our net zero emission goals. Our electricity grid isn't just wires and poles. It's the lifeblood of our economy. It's the linchpin of our environmental ambitions. It powers our homes, it fuels our industries, it sustains our way of life. Yet, its significance extends far beyond mere convenience. It's the backbone of our transition to a greener, cleaner tomorrow. And a robust electricity grid is essential for integrating renewable energy sources like wind, solar, hydroelectric power into our energy mix. It provides the infrastructure needed to efficiently transmit electricity from remote regions that are abundant in clean energy to urban centers where it's most needed. And without a strong grid, we know that we risk stalling our transition to renewables and hindering our efforts to reduce the carbon, to reduce the goals that we have all established for ourselves. And we know what happens if we delay strong action on climate change. Well, we all know the answer to that question. We're going to have continued increase in frequency and severity in extreme and devastating weather events. Just today in Ottawa, the area is under a severe weather and tornado watch, and it's May, and we're seeing tornado warnings in Canada, something almost unheard of 20 years ago. Environment and Climate Change Canada's meteorologists continue to predict weather conditions for spring and summer 2024 that could lead to greater wildfire risks. More than 4,500 residents of Fort Nelson and the nearby Fort Nelson First Nation have just recently been allowed to return home since an evacuation May 10th due to the out-of-control Parker Lake wildfire just west of the town. On May 14th, close to 7,000 residents from the southern part of Fort McMurray were ordered to leave their homes and to evacuate from the Fort McMurray area. All of us were watching that news closely, and we saw the impact that it had on those families that had to evacuate. Luckily, the fire risk dissipated, but the trauma from the 2016 wildfire can't be ignored. What people went through in 2016 was horrific. And I believe that as legislators, we need to do everything we can to ensure we don't continue down this climate emergency path. We also can't afford increasing climate emergencies. We know that Public Safety Canada's Canadian Disaster Database shows the Fort McMurray 2016 fire cost over $4 billion, with an additional $3.6 billion in insurance claims. And I know that I've talked to many families who were worried about even being able to insure their homes and increase insurance costs to their household budgets and the impact that puts on them in terms of affordability. In total, the Fort McMurray fires burned approximately 580,000 hectares of land, and it caused the evacuation of over 90,000 people and destroyed 2,400 homes and businesses. And even communities far from active fires were and will be affected by air pollution created by wildfire smoke. And these conditions are often compounded with extreme heat. A few weeks ago, the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources said, and this is a quote, that last year Canadians experienced the most destructive forest fire season in our nation's history. And we know that climate change has been a root cause of their increased frequency and intensity. I think it's important for us as committee members to also acknowledge the physical and mental health impacts that results from these wildfires. The Minister of Health said that wildfires can have significant negative impacts on our physical and mental well-being, and even when they are burning thousands of kilometers away from us. So we certainly saw that last year, and we all saw that firsthand with cities across the country blanketed in hazardous smoke. I know that my colleague, MP Angus, we certainly saw that in Northern Ontario, and the fact of how hazardous that smoke was, especially people who live with conditions such as with fragile lungs. With the 2024 wildfire season approaching, our government is ensuring that people in Canada have the tools and the information that they need to understand and manage the health risks that are associated with the wildfires. I think it's imperative that we decarbonize our electricity grid, and it's not only dangerous to continue on the path of fossil fuel energy, it's frankly irresponsible. But the consequences of neglecting our electricity grid extend beyond environmental and climate issues. A weak grid, and we've heard witnesses tell us this, leaves us vulnerable to power outages, grid instability, and energy insecurity. It threatens the reliability of our energy supply, it jeopardizes the functioning of essential services, and it's disrupting everyday life. This means we need to do the work now, and that we need to continue with our electricity study, to hear from witnesses who can guide our actions in building a resilience into our electricity grid. The witnesses that we have heard to date, because the study is currently underway, have all talked about the need to act on an urgent basis in addressing our electricity grid. Witnesses have told this committee about the need to increase energy storage capacity and to ensure grid efficiency. And we know battery energy storage is a major part of this. And I can tell you that in Sudbury, we are actively working to produce the materials needed to support battery storage for our grid. The demand for critical minerals like lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all of these are essential for battery storage and also for the manufacturing of electric vehicles, batteries, and that demand is soaring. Canada, with its abundant mineral resources, particularly in regions like Sudbury and Northern Ontario, holds tremendous potential to become a global leader in the EV economy. However, realizing this potential hinges on developing a robust EV supply chain, from mining and processing to battery manufacturing and recycling. MP Angus had talked about, when he spoke earlier today, about meeting with mining leaders, and all of them have talked about the need to build that supply chain and the importance of that in conjunction with the critical minerals that we have. We often hear from our colleagues across the way that jobs are at risk in Canada's clean economy, but nothing could be further from the truth. I can tell you that in Sudbury, we're seeing an unprecedented demand for labor in the mining industry and an increased availability of jobs in the related value chain sector. Electricity is the future of mining. Our mining companies are transitioning from diesel-powered trucks and loaders and drills towards electric alternatives. And this is making mining safer, and it's also less polluting. Innovation in mining, such as moving to electrification, is part of how Sudbury's story went from being a mining town to being a mindful town. Our regreening efforts are globally respected, and electrification continues to help us lead the way. I attended PDAC this year and last year.
Point of order.
Where
Ms. Lapointe, we have a point of order. I'll ask you to just pause for a moment. Mr. Falk on the point of order.
Yeah, I've been listening really carefully, and she's talking about mining and electricity. That really has nothing to do with the amendment that we're debating. And I'm wondering whether perhaps she could rein it in. I know we allow for a lot of latitude, and I think that's useful and helpful, but she may as well talk about plastic straws as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Milkshakes.
Yeah, I think that's... Thank you, and I'll let you do that if you like. But I think I'll let Ms. Lapointe keep providing her rationale, Mr. Falk, on your point of order, because she's talking about the importance of the previous study. So I'll let Ms. Lapointe continue on the rationale and why that's important to her. Go ahead, Ms. Lapointe.
Thank you, Chair. In Ontario, the independent electricity system operator is responsible for ensuring that there's enough power to meet the province's energy needs in real time, while also planning and securing energy for the future. And this operator, their annual planning outlook forecasts that Ontario's total electricity demand is going to increase by 60% over the next 25 years. And the report states that they do this by balancing the supply and the demand for electricity in Ontario and directing its flow across the province's transmission lines, and planning for the province's medium and long-term energy needs, and securing clean sources of supply to meet those needs. They oversee the electricity wholesale market, and they coordinate province-wide conservation efforts. And they say that energy storage will power the grid transformation. And they state, and I'm going to quote what the report says, after years of stable supply, Ontario is entering a period of need with demand expected to increase by 2% per year over the next 20 years due to electrification, decarbonization, and economic growth. Energy storage is well positioned to help support this need, providing a reliable and flexible form of electricity supply that can underpin the energy transformation of the future. Storage is unique among electricity types in that it can act as a form of both supply and demand, drawing energy from the grid during off-peak hours when demand is low, and injecting that energy back into the grid when it is needed most. Storage is particularly useful in supporting the wide-scale integration of renewable resources like wind and solar, because it can help smooth out changes in energy output caused by unpredictable weather. The report goes on to say that Ontario already has one of the cleanest electricity systems in North America, getting most of our power from hydro and nuclear generation. Energy storage can help leverage these existing assets while helping to enable more renewables to ensure clean, reliable, and affordable electricity for Ontario's homes and businesses. So, the Crown Corporation in Ontario responsible for the safety and resiliency of our electricity grid is urgently and actively working on protecting Ontarians from a failed grid. And I think as legislators, we can't delay the important work of hearing from experts who can guide our policy in grid protection, because we have to be willing to be able to partner with our provinces and our territories and our municipalities in this important work.
Point of
and
order.
I think continuing.
Ms. Lapointe, we have a point of order. I'll just ask you to hold for a second. Mr. Angus on the point of order.
Thank you, Chair, and I don't want to interrupt my honourable colleague, and I do appreciate that she did the shout-out for the Cobalt Fire, which was just in my back 40 and went from 0 to 14 hectares to 164 hectares in an hour during our committee hearings last week. So I was paying a lot of attention to our family loading their car up, whereas now I'm trying to really keep my eyes open here. And the fire in Cobalt is still out of control. But I just wanted to ask my honourable colleague, with all due respect, because we have 15 minutes left, if she's planning on talking the clock out, will there be other interventions? Because I could pack my bags, we could do other stuff. So I've just you know, as a respect to colleagues, I don't know how long the thing she's reading is, but maybe is it like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes? If she could just give us a heads up, it would be helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Angus, on the point of order. We do have other speakers on the speaking order as well, but Ms. Lapointe does have the floor, and I'll allow Ms. Lapointe to continue on why she think it's important to do the electricity study, which I've heard much of a rationale about. So, Ms. Lapointe, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and I am very close to closing in my comments. I think that continuing work to build a reliable and an affordable and sustainable electricity system is critical in ensuring communities will flourish and businesses will have the confidence to invest and industries can decarbonize. And we know that a strong and a resilient electricity grid is also a matter of national security. Innovation, powerful AI applications, and supercomputers all require significant amounts of electricity. Developing the resilience of our grid is critical, and we have witnesses who can share their expertise on developing this resilience with our committee. We had a number of witnesses before us last week, in fact, and unfortunately, we weren't able to hear all of their testimony. Ultimately, we can't delay our study on Canada's electricity and grid network. There's too much at stake to allow a less pressing but no less important issue to take precedence over our current study. And I want to thank the Chair for giving me this time today at committee.
Thank you, Ms. Lapointe. We'll now go to MP Shifke.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts on what we were discussing today. At first, I guess I want to start, Chair, by sharing with my colleague, MP Angus, that I don't oppose the study that he's put forward. In fact, I look forward to being a part of that discussion. I look forward to having the testimony before us and studying that.
Point of order.
The issue.
MP Shifke, I'll ask you to hold for a second. We have a point of order from Mr. Angus.
Well, I've been in a lot of committees that have been really toxic, and I really appreciate that he reached out, and I want to reach across the aisle to him and say, that's fantastic, so why don't we put this to a vote?
Thank you, Mr. Angus. I'm not sure if that's a point of order, but a conversation we're having. I will, MP Shifke, I'll ask you to continue where you left off. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. What I was going to add to that, though, Chair, was that unfortunately, even though I agree with the substance of the motion, there's one component that I do not agree with, and that is the component that essentially states that this study would supersede all the other studies, including the one that we just embarked on. And the reason I can't agree with that, and the reason I will not be supporting the motion as it is written and as it was amended, is because the study with regards to Canada's electrical grid is one that's incredibly important to my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges. And it's actually, I was very excited when I got appointed to this committee to have been told that this was going to be the first study that we were going to be embarking on. And the reason it's important to my community, Chair, is that my community has experienced over the last 2 years significant environmental events, unprecedented environmental events that led to tens of thousands of my constituents being without power several times in the midst of the cold winter in January and February for several days. And it brought to light the challenges that remain in Canada, whether it's my community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges or communities that my fellow members of all parties represent, that are represented on this committee. And so if you're looking for the aspect that's most important to me, Chair, of the motion that was put forward of the electricity grid study, it's the component that deals with the challenges to improve electrical production and distribution across Canada. Distribution for me is key. Chair, last January of 2023, we had yet another ice storm in Canada. It was the second worst ice storm in our history, second only to the one that we experienced in the late 90s, where several 100,000 Quebecers, thousands in my own community of Vaudreuil-Soulanges, and my honorable colleague from the Bloc Québécois will remember this well, were left without power. And the reason they were left without power is, for the most part, because of the extra weight that was put on the transmission lines that either A, couldn't have been supported by the existing infrastructure, or B, was damaged by falling trees. And in some cases, it took up to 6 days to restore power when we had temperatures in the overnight, in the evenings, going down to -15, -16 degrees. And Chair, it got to the point where not only did my municipalities have to open up emergency centers, the community centers had to be turned into emergency centers where seniors or those who didn't have access to some form of a generator had to go into those community centers overnight and then return to their homes during the day and then make their way back to the community centers overnight. And something else that was compounded by that, Chair, is that while all of this was going on, we didn't have a way as elected officials, whether it was myself as the federal member or the two provincial members, Marie-Claude Nichols and Marilyn Picard, respectively, and the mayors, we didn't have access to any way to communicate with one another. What happened when we lost electricity was that the telecommunications system in the province, particularly in the south, was so heavily affected by the loss of power that we couldn't even communicate our collective response to the tens of thousands of our constituents that we needed to respond to. And so the discussion that we've been having since then is what needs to be done to the grid to make it more resilient, to be able to support the needs of our constituents as we make our way into the new world, which is a new world that's addressing climate change. So prior to embarking on this important study, I reached out to my mayors to ask them if they had any questions they wanted me to ask on their behalf. I put forward my own questions that I wanted to ask. And just before being able to ask those questions on behalf of my elected representatives that I work very closely with in my community, we had this motion that's presented by MP Angus, whom I admire and respect greatly. And this is a motion, as I said, that I support in the substance, and I'm looking forward to getting to that. But before we get to that, we have a pressing issue that for members like myself, for members, I'm sure there are other members in the committee for whom this is very important, we want to get to this. We need to address this issue. We need to talk about not just expanding and meeting the needs of Canadians tomorrow and figuring out how we're going to provide Canadians with that clean energy that we need to provide them with because our population is growing, but also how that energy is going to have to be clean energy and how we're going to go about doing that.
Point of order.
And
MP Shifke, there's a point of order, so I'll ask you to hold for 1 second. Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Yes, Chair. I just want to put on the record I've been the subject of a lot of love and respect from my Liberal colleagues today, but not one of them has mentioned TMX pipeline, and that's what we're here to discuss. So I can get by with less love, but I would really like to get something done. So we're now down to 6 minutes. So if he held off the patting me on the back, and we could talk about TMX, and maybe we get a vote so that we on Thursday we could get down to business. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Angus, for your point of order on rationale and but I believe the main is on the TMX pipeline, but the amendment is on also on bringing this forward before and ahead of any other studies. So it does tie in the previous study on that was underway. So I would ask everybody as you debate, you think of both those items, but I'll let MP Shifke continue because he's providing his rationale on why that study is important, and we should continue with it. So MP Shifke, go ahead. The floor is yours.
thank you very much, Chair. Just in response to my honorable colleague MP Angus on this, I don't have prepared remarks, Chair. This is not, for me, it's not a filibuster. I'm speaking on behalf of my community here. This study is an important one for my community. And what I shared earlier is that I'm not against the study that MP Angus is putting forward. I'm against the idea that it takes precedence over this very important study that we've already started, where we had witnesses come in ready to provide their testimony and share their expertise with us, prepared questions that many of us had collected from our constituents and drafted ourselves, ready to put forward to be able to get those kind of answers. And I just cannot see myself voting in favor.
MP Shifke, once again, we have another point of order. I'm going to ask you to hold right there for a second. Ms. Stubbs on a point of order.
Thanks, Chair. I've just offered to the honourable member a solution for that problem about which he seems concerned. We, of course, have said we would resume with the study afterwards, and also that he should know that there's not a single thing stopping him from getting those witnesses to make written submissions, for getting whoever it is that he wanted to answer certain questions or put certain facts on the record. He can get them to submit that. There's no barrier. But is the member actually honestly making the argument that the Government of Canada has no grip whatsoever on, in terms of current and future electricity generation capacity and distribution, except for the requirement of this study with 5-minute opening comments from private sector proponents and then 6 minutes of question and answer exchanges? Because if that's the argument he's actually making, then, oh man, are we ever in a world of trouble?
On the point of order, MP Shifke, before you proceed, I would ask colleagues to use the point of orders for point of order, not for debate and not for Q&A, but you're more than welcome to have those discussions in private or during your own debate time and address those issues, and others can provide comments when their time is up. So
Point of order.
we have another point of order here, MP Shifke. Before I go back to you, I'll go to Mr. Angus on a point of order.
You know, people, I just, being that I've been given so much love, I feel I should share it. And Chair, I think you're doing an excellent job. And you've disagreed with almost all of my interventions. And I think technically I was probably right on maybe 10 to 15% of them. But I think you've done it in a very dignified way. And I will study your reflections in the blue so that the next time I ask my colleagues about filibustering, I might be able to take it to an extra level. So I want to thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, MP Angus, for acknowledging the work of this committee, and I appreciate the work all of you do. And I think everybody today has had an opportunity to interject. It's not one member. I think it's been around this horseshoe, and it's been great. MP Shifke, we do have a few more minutes, and I know there's a few point of orders, so I do want to turn it back over to you, and just I may ask you to pause at some point when we're running at the end of time at our committee. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I guess I'll add the remarks of MP Stubbs that we are in a world of trouble when elected representatives like Ms. Stubbs don't understand the difference between a point of order and debate, and perhaps have not brushed up on procedure in committee. But moving on from that and getting back to what I was saying, I don't see...
MP Shifke, we do have another point of order, so I'm going to ask you to pause once again. And MP Stubbs on a point of order.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks for the hot tip. Let me just say I'm going to be quite confident that the people of Lakeland will give a verdict on my work and probably aren't quite as concerned about the navel-gazing obsession with our rules in rooms like this when my constituents are also watching this abysmal waste of time and tax dollars in this display today.
Okay, thank you on that point of order. I will go back to you, MP Shifke, with about 90 seconds. And just to let you know, MP Shifke, we'll have the opportunity to continue on in if you have further commentary at our next meeting, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Stubbs brought up an interesting point, Chair, and that is, why don't we just ask the witnesses to provide written testimony? That does not allow for information to be presented and for follow-up or new questions to be developed. And that just happened in the previous meeting, Chair, where I had the questions I had referred to that were submitted to me by several of my mayors, as well as ones that I drafted. But then there was a witness in the previous meeting that had spoken to a lack of capacity to build transition lines across the country, and that being...
MP Shifke, we have a point of order, so I'll ask you to pause there. MP Angus?
Thank you so much, and I didn't want to interrupt his discourse, but it is 5:30, and I know that he has the floor to continue the filibuster when we come back on Thursday. Who else is on the list? Because at some point, I would like us to get to a vote, so I just was trying to get a sense of Thursday where we're looking at in terms of how the Liberal filibuster is going to continue.
Well, we have two more members after Mr. Shifke currently on the list on the amendment. Okay, and others may at the next meeting put their hands up. I'm not sure, but we'll see next meeting. MP Shifke, you do have the floor, and we will continue on with you next meeting. We are at 5:30, and so we will suspend.